You hear rock music? Elizabeth says, are you playing rock music? So noisy. No, that's something on your end there. Liz, sorry, nothing here, no rock music. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. But, it wouldn't surprise me, the shenanigans happening with YouTube tonight. Really, quite surprised. It hasn't really been so great. Can you hear me okay? Let me type something, see if you hear me. We've been dealing with technical issues the last couple of days, and I think it's okay now, but very strange. We shared the stream in advance, and then YouTube just killed the stream. It just said your stream's ended. So, really sorry about that. Are you still having the music problem, Liz? Can you tell me if you get it sorted out? Shouldn't be anything like that over here. Can you hear me? Shalom, shalom, shalom. Okay, let me see. There, I killed one extra mic. Maybe that'll help a bit. Shalom. Noisy, huh? Weird. I'm using the noise canceling microphone. This Blue Yeti. I wonder what's going on. It seems like we're just under attack lately. Sounds like broken radio and robot. Zeddy says. Huh. Let me have a look, see. Okay, let's see. I think, how about now? How about now? Is it better now? I think the gain got turned all the way up somehow. Is the sound better now? Bizarre. Shalom. Yeah, it keeps going red on my screen when I'm talking. You can hear me, but does it sound like a robot still on a broken radio, or is it better now? It's very strange. Is it better? Better. Does it sound clear? I mean, we're using a high quality microphone here, so really it should be great. Is what it should be. The computer's having problems with its USB port, so I still background noise but softer. Alright, how about now? I think this should be the best. I'll just put the microphone right up here, and I turn the gain way down so it shouldn't pick up anything else. You guys hear me okay now? Shalom. Shalom. Clear now. Still some background noise, but softer. Okay. Same, huh? Well, we'll get it figured out. Yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on with this. So, thank you to the you guys for coming. Sorry about the fiasco. I hope you all made it over here from the previous link. YouTube just killed my link. I don't know why. It didn't give an explanation why it ended the stream. So, yeah, not cool, YouTube. Not cool. So, look, tonight we're not going to do a normal premiere like we usually would. We're getting just kind of these technical things worked out. But I wanted to talk with you guys about just kind of one major subject, unless you guys want to bring something else up. I wanted to talk about the concept of textual criticism of the Bible. And I think this is a little important because, I got some panicked people out there on the net contacting me and wondering what's going on, and every once in a while I teach about this, but I don't always go through and tell all the details. So I don't want you guys to be ignorant of what the situation is with the Greek New Testament or the Greek apostolic writings. All right, so maybe we'll just do 15-20 minutes tonight, and then I'll let you guys go. We'll just get this topic banged out, unless you got something else you want to talk about too. This might be an experiment for our foray into actual podcasting, right? So I show on my side there are 3 of you here right now, so thank you for the 3 of you here. Someone was telling me that there were lots of people, but that was on the other link, the link that got killed. So I don't know, maybe that's why YouTube killed it. They didn't like that we had so many people showing up. Oh, what a shame. So anyway, if this is any good, I'll leave it up there and you can see it afterwards again. It doesn't have to be live. So I guess it's just Zadie, Elizabeth, and someone else. Okay, there's 4 now, so people are starting to trickle in. Yeah, so here we are. We're in the middle of Kol Moed. This is the less holy days from the Sukkot time. And so you're allowed to work for money and that kind of stuff on these days, but we still kind of keep the festive holiday spirit in mind. So happy holiday to all you guys for the festive season, the season of the Messiah's birth. Yeshua HaMashiach was born in this time period. And of course, we are in the holiday surrounding the Feast of Tabernacles. Right, looking forward to upcoming this Sunday for the Shemini Atzeret, the final holiday to the season for Israeli observation. Although many in the diaspora world outside of Israel continue for one more day. All right, 5 people are starting to come in. Yeah, so let me talk about this concept. So again, for any of you who are here for the first time, usually what we do is we put up a part of one of my drashot, recent teachings, and we cut it into 3 pieces, and then we go through it a few nights and we talk about it, pause, talk about it, chat over here. But tonight I want to do something a little bit different. I just want to, happy holidays, Jen. Tonight I want to just kind of deal with this issue that some people have expressed concern about textual criticism. So what is this and what does it really mean? So one thing that it answers is why the King James Version of the Bible is not the best version, not a very good version to use for readings in the apostolic writings. Now that's because it really is, the reason is, what we have when we talk about books of antiquity, like ancient works, like the New Testament scriptures, or Homer's Odyssey, or Homer's The Iliad, these other great works of antiquity, or like Plato's Republic, this kind of stuff. The question always is, whether it's a religious book or not, how do we know that what we have today is what the original author or authors wrote 2,000 years ago, right? Because remember, they didn't have photocopy machines back then. They didn't have, they didn't have webcams, they didn't have smartphones, all these sorts of things to copy. Shalom, Ted, good to see you here. So what did they have? How did they handle it? What did they do? And I'm just going to talk about it. I don't have a bunch of stuff prepared to show you. Maybe I'll show you one of my critical texts here, just kind of as we get into talking about it a little bit more. This is a Greek Bible, so it's just the apostolic writings. And I don't know how much you can see that on my camera there. So it's just in Greek. And then at the bottom there's some notes. Those notes are what we call the critical apparatus. So this is how scholars deal with the issue today. How do we know that what we have is the original, or the autographia? It means from auto, meaning self, graphia from graphe, right? Scripture or writings, right? Shalom. And so this is important, I think, for believers to understand, whether you're Messianics or regular flavor, whatever other denomination. It's important to know how this happens. It's much more complex with the Tanakh because it is just outright ancient, right? The Hebrew Bible is very, very, very old, right? Whereas the apostolic writings, the New Testament, this is still 2,000 years old, right? So we're still talking about books of antiquity. So if you've ever interacted with a Muslim person before who knew a little bit, they might have challenged you by saying, hey, look, at least we know what we have. Our Quran today is the same as it was back when Muhammad first spoke it, right? Which, by the way, is not true, but they think it's true. And on our side, they'll say, look, you don't even know what you have. There's different copies of the New Testament. How could you claim to have the New Testament? You don't have it, right? And so this is really a colossal form of misunderstanding. What has happened is, with books of antiquity like the New Testament, the Quran is not considered an ancient work, okay? Because the Quran comes into the scene supposedly in the late 600s, right? Mid to late 600s. So 600 years after the New Testament, and it's only a handful of centuries before the printing press was invented, right? So you don't gotta protect much, and then you can just print it, right? So there's not much to go from, much that could change in that time, and there's just not that much that they have to really worry about. With the apostolic writings, these are hand copies that people were making, and it happened under a period of extreme persecution by Rome. Rome was torturing believers, burning New Testaments, right? They explicitly, for for the first 300 years, there was persecution. I think it's 300. Yeah, like. Or maybe 3rd century, okay, maybe 200 and change. There was extreme persecution from Rome, right? And so what you have is, boom, an explosion of documents. People are hand copying. They're not professional scribes. They're making hand copies fast. The Romans are knocking on the door. Run, Matthew, run! It's running with it. The Romans recorded events of burning hundreds of manuscripts, right? So these might not be complete New Testaments, but they might be Gospels. They might be letters from Paul. These sorts of things, right? Because it was seen as a threat to the pagans. This faith. Normal Jewish writings were also persecuted, but not really on the level that the apostolic writings were. So what happens is, over time, archaeologists discover papyri in Egypt. They find something over here in the Sinai. They find pieces, and it's always being collated and kind of grouped together so we can find out what the original really was, because people make mistakes when they're copying by hand, right? There are common scribal mistakes. So, for example, like today, if you had to hand copy something, and you're looking up, and let's say it's in English, you're looking up, you put your finger there, you look down, you write, or maybe you don't put your finger, you just look up, you write, and let's say the word ended in T-I-O-N. Lots of English words end in T-I-O-N, right? And so what happened is your eyes might finish on a word ending in T-I-O-N, you go to write, and you come back up, and you accidentally look one line below it at a different word ending in T-I-O-N. And so you leave out a line, right? So there are all kinds of common copyist errors like this, which scholars know about and they understand. And so when they're looking at two different manuscripts, and let's say they're only different in that one is missing a few lines, and they can see how where the other one, it's got something equivalent to this in Greek, ending in like the English T-I-O-N, and then below it, so they can see, okay, this was dropped out by the guy because his eyes fell down a line, right? And there's a lot of things like this that scribes mistakes they would make. For example, you had in the Middle Ages, you had entire centers that were devoted to copying texts. And oftentimes, one guy would be reading the Greek aloud, and the scribes would be hearing the Greek, and then they would write down what they heard. So you could have like multiple copies fast. Again, no photocopy machine, right? So you get some auditory mistakes that are made sometimes, errors that someone makes through hearing. These are identified. There's an entire science called textual criticism, or biblical textual criticism, where these expert Greek scholars, they come together, they have committees that are formed, and they collate these differences and they rank them. Which one is more likely to be more authentic, right? So one of the ways that they rank them is by the age of the manuscript, right? So if you have a manuscript which is from the 2nd century, right? Or we have a fragment from the 1st century, right? So there's part of John from the 1st century, right? So it's 30 years after John wrote it or something, right? But it's not the full manuscript, but it's a fragment. So since it's so old, there's less time for copyist errors to come in, right? Like that might have been a copy from the original, or just a copy of a copy, right? Whereas if you come hundreds of years later, you're dealing with copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. So there's more time for mistakes to enter into the text. What usually happens is the text grows, right? Because over time, people, they clarify, or you might have a scribal comment in the column, and it gets added in there. So one such example of this is the scholars know it's a mistake. Well, some of the manuscript traditions have, about Yeshua, they have an extra line where it says, he therefore declared all foods clean. Okay, this is the whole talk. Remember the Pharisees come up and they say, hey, why don't your students do the ritual washing of their hands before they eat, right? And Yeshua's like, look, ritual washing of hands doesn't make the food clean or unclean. It's what comes out of the mouth, not what comes in, right? And so it's not a talk ever about shrimps are okay now, okay? Or lobster's okay now, right? Or escargot, snails is fine. No, none of that stuff's allowed. It's all disgusting, right? It all makes you unclean, right? It makes the temple of God unclean, right? So none of that was permitted. But over time, some monk put a note, just like we put notes in our Bible on the side. He put a note. He misunderstood. He said, he therefore declared all foods clean, right? Okay. And then another copyist in the future, the copyist, one good thing about the scribes, they would copy everything, even the notes on the side, right? They'd copy that. But at some point in time, someone mistook that note as part of the text, like a run-on sentence or something. And so it got absorbed into the text. But what's great is, through the scientific method that's used, we know that that was a later addition. And so that would be ranked very, very low. It'd probably get a grade of like D or E, like a very low, not original, right? So when you have one of these critical Greek texts that translators use for translating the Bible, they would be looking at that verse, and there's a little footnote, and it tells you, hey, this little blurb about he therefore declared all foods clean, this is not in the oldest manuscript. So that's probably not authentic, right? Now, many of you are familiar with the story of the adulterous woman, right? I've shared this with you, that all the scholars from all the denominations who sit on these committees, the United Bible Society Committee, they know that that was a later addition to the Bible. That was not part of the Gospel of John. Talking about the last verse of John chapter 7 and the first 12 verses of John chapter 8. Okay, this was not part of the Bible. Okay, this was added much later. There is no doubt, none of the biblical scholars think that that is original. All right, that story was added. So there's only a few places like this where you have a major difference, but it's important to know. And so even though the Bible scholars know this, if you have a modern English translation, NIV, NASB, ESV, one of these, because it's already such a part of Gentile Christian tradition to have that story, because what a great story. It makes the law look like it's bad, right? The law says to do this, but what do you say, right? And then, of course, Yeshua finds a way to not enact the law, right? So it's like a great story of grace triumphing over the law, as if there's like some battle between the two, right? When really they depend on each other, right? There is no grace without law. Grace from what, right? They coexist and work together. The Proverbs 31, talking about the Eshet Chayil, says, Torah chesed al shoma. The Torah of grace, the law of grace, is on her tongue, right? Meaning when she speaks to people and has dealings and stuff. So, but that whole story, it's false. In some manuscripts, it's part of Luke, right? And then it finally ends up in John. And as a Greek reader, I can tell you that when you read it, it even sounds like someone else wrote it. It feels like it's not John anymore. And when you really drill deep, you find out that the vocabulary is different than John. So this was a beautiful story, a Christian midrash, if you will, that was in search of a home, and eventually got put in the text, and now it's in the King James Bible. And it's in most Bibles because the scholars are afraid to correct the text. Because what happens when you come out with a new scholarly Bible translation, and they tell you they remove something that shouldn't be there, but they leave the verse numbering, so you'll notice the verse is missing. Nobody's trying to be sneaky, right? But this is based on what we know the Greek text to be now, right? We're improving. We're finding older texts, right? More copies of older things, and they can understand that really those verses didn't belong, so they get deleted, okay? Or, a word drops out or something. And then alarmists who are not scholars, who don't know Greek, who don't know about how textual criticism works, they'll send out these crazy emails. Oh, the New Agers, they're changing your Bible. It's HarperCollins because they love gay stuff, and just, it's just ignorance. It's not true. It's not true. Okay? It's not true. This is how the scholarship works. All right? This is how much we love the Bible, that we're trying to get it back as precise as possible to the original. And there's really, really good stuff. So why am I sharing this? Because sometimes people they don't take it so well. You love your adulterous woman story, and people want to keep their story. You can keep the story. Jews, we love midrash, right? We love to have midrash. We love to talk about, why, well, the legend is that this happened, right? And sometimes it explains more, right? So this is just a midrash that somehow accidentally ended up in the text, right? And we know it doesn't belong there. So if you have any of those modern Bible translations, you look, there'll be a symbol like a bracket or double brackets and a footnote. They'll tell you all about it. They'll say something about, hey, this isn't really authentic or something, but they're scared to delete it. Right? They're scared to delete it because of the backlash. So they'd rather keep something that's not part of the Bible. They'd rather violate the commandment to not add or take away to Scripture. Right? They'll leave the addition even though they know it doesn't belong there, because they think, we'll put a footnote, those people who read footnotes, they'll see, and it's something benign. Usually, it's not like the textual apparatus. The textual apparatus say this cannot be authentic, usually in German, but says this cannot be authentic, right? Or it's known that this is inauthentic. But what these guys do, they water it down a little bit. They'll say, the following verses are not found in the oldest manuscripts, right? So when reading, you might think, okay, it's real, but for some reason it's not in those manuscripts. Right, the reason's because it's not authentic, you see. So I think it's important to know this stuff so you don't get surprised by some atheist or a Muslim who thinks they know something about textual criticism trying to come at you. Now, I said this, I want to share, since we brought up Islam, is the Quran actually better? Is it kept in better shape than the Bible? Is that really true? Okay, so you need to know what happened with the Quran. With the Quran, they do have variances, right? But they try to ignore them. They don't have a critical edition. There's no critical edition of the Quran. Like we have a few of them of the Greek for the apostolic writings. And we also have for the Hebrew, the BHS and the BHQ, right? Where it'll say, look, Dead Sea Scrolls says this, the Greek translation says this, the Syriac translation, they look at the ancient translations even when we're trying to compare what are the ancient witnesses. Hope this isn't too boring to you guys. I just think it's something important, and I just want to kind of give it a one-over, and we didn't really have time for a full, premiere, plus I had some computer issues, so I just thought, let's see if this is working okay for the podcast. So what happened in Islam is there was a certain ruler named Uthman, and what Uthman did, he noticed that versions of the Quran were different from one another. And the Quran makes a big deal out of saying the Bible has been edited by Christians or whatever, right? That the Christians and the Jews changed their scripture. And so, or at least some of their hadith says this. So what Uthman did was he collected all the versions. They chose one that he liked. Again, this is just a ruler, right? Chose one he liked, and he gave the order to burn the rest. Okay? So when Muslims try to make a claim, hey, we have the Quran the same as it was back then. No. You have the same Quran back until one guy chose to burn all the ones that were different. That's the difference between our textual traditions. We have the data of the Greek New Testament and the Syriac translations, and the Greek translations, and the Coptic translations, and the Latin. We have it. We have it all. We can see all the differences, so that we can see where it's very clear what the original really was. Right? We're probably like at 99.9% back to what the autographer was. We have 5,800 manuscripts from the apostolic writings, right? And we got a pretty good idea. With the Quran, they can't do that, because it was controlled by the government. The government burned all the stuff that they didn't like. They chose a version that they liked, perhaps that was friendly to the caliphate, right? Respect your leaders and all that kind of crap, stuff. Sorry. And then they burned the rest. There were Muslims who died because they refused to give up their Quran, right? One of them, because he had been, one of the guys who was injured badly because he wouldn't give them his Quran, was someone who was mentioned by the Prophet as being the expert on Quran. He named 3 experts. He said, if you want to know what the Quran says, go to this guy. He recites it perfectly, right? But his Quran was different, right? So we know that he's the one that Muhammad said has it perfectly, but yet they destroyed his. They took his and they destroyed it because it was different from the one that the government liked. Okay, so just so you're armed, I want you to be armed. We're supposed to always be ready with an answer for the faith that is within us when someone attacks our faith or attacks our textual tradition, or they want to, hey, how can you believe this? So I want you guys to know that, no, the Quran is not a better record. We basically don't know what the massive variances were because they destroyed them. But some have been found. We see there were some pretty big variances. There still are, even between, from that time period that came later, even though it was a controlled transmission. They weren't being persecuted, for example, the way that early Christians and Messianic Jews were being persecuted. So I hope you guys understand. Do you have any comments or questions about this? It's called textual criticism. So just to give you an idea, I think it's Plato's Republic. We only have 2 ancient manuscripts from that, okay? So I'm telling you, with the apostolic writings, we have 5,800 manuscripts. Okay? There is no book from antiquity which has as many copies of it, well, they're called witnesses of it, as the New Testament has. Because it went all over the world, right? And then it went into all different languages. We have ancient Slavonic and all kinds of translations. So you can also take a look at the translation and say, oh, this translation matches this Greek manuscript. So they were copying from this family of text, right? You can kind of go around like that. So what's the problem with the King James? Why is King James bad to have for the New Testament? Well, the problem with the King James is that when they were going to make this translation, there was a Roman Catholic monk known as Erasmus, right? And Erasmus was trying to publish the first critical Greek text, right? So what he had, I think it was 6 texts of Greek, and he put them side to side and he published them, right? And he's rushing to get it out because there's like a competition back in Europe in those days to get the first Greek New Testament out there, right? Okay. And what happened was he wanted the Alexandrian family manuscripts from the Vatican because everybody knew those were much older. It was an older text type, an older tradition, right? The ones that he had were from the Byzantine family, right, which were newer. It was a newer tradition. He wanted the older text because older is better, usually, when you're talking about original, we're trying to get back to original manuscripts. So, the Vatican said, no, you can't have it. They wouldn't let him have it. They wouldn't let somebody copy it for him. So Erasmus just had to publish. And his work is what the King James translators used. Now, one of the problems with it, other than being newer Greek texts, which had more errors creep in, like he therefore declared all foods clean, right? And the story of the adulterous woman, right? And there's a verse in Mark, near the end of Mark, where it says, about believers that they'll be able to be bitten by snakes and drink poison and nothing will kill them. That's false. That was not part of the original. That's added, right? And but that was in his. That's what he had access to. But here's how bad his stuff was. He did not have the Book of Revelation in Greek. Did you know this? He did not have it in Greek. What did he have? He had a Latin commentary on the Book of Revelation. And in the commentary, each verse they would list it in Greek. So who knows what Greek reference they were using. They'd use it in Greek. And so what he did was he took that Greek, he extracted it from the Latin commentary to make that in his Greek New Testament for the Book of Revelation. The problem was the last 6 verses of Revelation were not there. They're gone. What was he going to do? So what he did was he took the Latin translation, he translated that back into Greek, which, by the way, when he did so, we now have 2 words that Erasmus used that are nowhere else in the Greek New Testament. So people had to guess what these words mean, right? So he's like coining phrases, or maybe he knew them from some other Greek literature, right? So he translates, he makes a new Greek text for it's not ancient, it's new, it's from Latin. So it's from a translation. So somebody translated who knows what Greek into Latin, and then he translated that Latin back into Greek. He didn't have the Greek that they had. And then that is what the King James translators used to translate into English. And so it's really funny when you get these like guys that, King James only, that's the one. Well, really not. Really not. Revelation is strange in King James, in the Greek. The Greek that was... So, and then, as a marketing technique, back then people advertised in Latin. So they decided to call this, they invented the term textus receptus, which means the received text. And when you hear that, you think, the received, this has been passed down from generation to generation to generation to generation. But this was a 1600s marketing technique. You understand? It was to get people to buy it. Erasmus' business partner, who was pushing him to publish already, this was his idea, he puts it out, the received text. And so to this day, when you hear people talking about the received text, what they mean is this kind of quasi-artificial Greek text that was used to translate the King James Bible. Okay? So no, when you get a modern Bible translation and a verse that you knew is missing, nobody removed that verse. That verse was never there to begin with. You understand? It was not there. This was an addition that happened over centuries of editions and copyist errors, 1,500 years, and then finally get the King James, based on this. All right? So I hope you guys understand a little bit better how that works. If you want to learn more about this, if you enjoy listening to debates, there's an excellent debater who I really like. He is a Reformed Baptist. His name is Dr. James White from Alpha and Omega Ministries, and I enjoy listening to his debates with Muslims. So he'll have a nice debate with, an imam or something. He's extremely polite but very knowledgeable. He's very familiar with most of their literature, and invariably the Muslims will attack the authenticity of the Bible, and this is when he's going to smack him down with a lot of the information like I shared with you. For example, I did not realize that those last 6, I knew it was bad, the Greek text that they had for the King James, but I didn't realize that the last 6 verses of Revelation were even missing. right? That Erasmus just had to kind of like, slap something together from the Latin into Greek, right? So I learned this from Dr. White. And, you might want to check it out on YouTube. Just kind of Google James White debate Muslim, right? Or sometimes he debates Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons. Those are all interesting. But if you want to hear the critical stuff, he'll get into it with the Muslims usually. All right, you guys, I think I'm probably going to check out for tonight. Thanks for coming in. We hope you learned something. I hope we're getting our tech stuff worked out. MT says can't post comments. So you should be able to go into the chat and write something in chat, right? Yeah, I see Shalom says, I think what happens is the comments section will be opened up after it's no longer live. So it'll go public after being live, and then you'll be able to comment. I think that might be the deal. Yeah, please remember to thumbs up. I only see 6 of you, and we have 3 likes. That's 50%. That basically tells YouTube, okay, this was not interesting, which maybe it wasn't. This isn't my usual format, right? I just, I had some people expressing concern, like, was the Bible really screwed up so badly? And I want you to understand, it was not messed up. The science that goes into this reconstructing of the Greek text, the critical text, is very, 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 very good. And we know when I'm reading, like when I'm teaching to you guys in my Revelation class, like I can look here. So here's an example. Let's see if you can see it. So I can look here, like in Revelation. Oh, it's kind of hard to make out, isn't it? The camera didn't like it. Okay, anyway. And at the very bottom, we have this is the textual apparatus, and it'll say like Alpha says whatever. Pardon me, Aleph. It'll have a Hebrew Aleph. Hebrew Aleph means the Textus Sinaiticus. This is the oldest complete Greek text of the New Testament, and also most of the Septuagint that was found in the Sinai. Right? It's very, very old. Very, very old. So it'll say, look, this one says this. Right? So we have that information available. When we're reading along and we're like, I'm not sure, is there something wrong with this reading? There'll be a footnote and you can look and see. So we have it available. Those who read the apostolic writings in the Greek, we have it. We have these footnotes and they tell us. It's not like in Islam where if you got a Quran, you don't know what they deleted. You don't know what Uthman burned. Right? You just don't know. We know. We can look and compare, and we see. That's how we know that the story of the adulterous woman is fake. That's how we know that these other sorts of things are fake. When they're fake, we know. So you can rest secured. And most of the modern Bible translations, actually all of them, except even New King James, I think uses textual criticism. They use textual criticism to improve the text. Jen asked, can I recommend an English Bible translation? Okay, so I'll just tell you. From the Tanakh, I only read the Hebrew. Right? I don't read translation unless I really have to. Like, or if I just want to see. Sometimes somebody will say, "Really? That's what it says?" And they'll say, "But NIV says this or whatever." And I'll take a look and I'll be like, "Why did they do that?" And then I kind of mull over. Oh, they're translating from Septuagint on that verse, right? Like they felt the Septuagint was a better witness of what should have been there, right? Something like that. But for the New Testament, I do often read from English. Unless it's Johannine. If it's stuff that John wrote, I just read it in the Greek, right? But a lot of the other stuff, Paul or whatever, I do like to read an English translation and then maybe compare to the Greek. And for that, I generally prefer the ESV. That's kind of my go-to. I like the ESV. I think it's pretty good. I like these translations by committee as well. So like, our Messianic scholar, Dr. Stern, who passed away recently here on the High Holy Days, many people like his Jewish New Testament, which later became part of his complete Bible translation project, the Complete Jewish Bible. I have some issues with some of Stern's translations, but in general, pretty good stuff on New Testament. Usually, I prefer reading a translation made by committee because you have various denominations. It's hard for someone to slip in their personal preference or whatever because the committee has to agree, right? So like ESV, it's translated by committee, right? The problem for us as Messianics is these guys tend to be antinomianists, right? So they tend to think the law is dead and crucified on the cross, all that stuff. So the whole committee will agree, to translate something a certain way, right? He therefore fulfilled, etc., something like that. Hey, Shalom Yosef, great. Glad you guys are here. So do you guys understand there's a whole, so it's just my personal favorite in English, but I'm working towards getting to the point to where I won't be Bezrat Hashem won't be leaning on English translations for any of the apostolic writings. That's my goal. I want to get to where it's all in the Greek always, right? So, and even when I read the Greek, I'm trying to think, what is it in the Hebrew original, right? Because much of the apostolic writings were written in Hebrew and then translated into Greek later, right? We know for sure the Gospel of Matthew, there's quite a bit of testimony from early church fathers and Jerome and some other people, Eusebius and others like this, that say they saw the Hebrew scroll and they call it the original, right? In the case of the book of Revelation, my opinion is that I think that the prophet John, Yochanan, I think he wrote it in Hebrew and then he went back and he wrote it in Greek. So I think you kind of have this weird situation where both are inspired, the lost Hebrew as well as the Greek, right? So... no problem, Dr. Dwayne saying he got busy with work. Sorry, you can come in. No problem, buddy. Yeah. So let's see. Any other comments or questions? You're very welcome, Jen. Yeah, ESV is pretty darn good. I know Dr. DeVere likes NASB. So NASB also not a bad translation. A lot of people like that, I just am not sure about recommending something for the Old Testament part, right? Because like I said, I'm in the Hebrew when I'm doing that, so I'm kind of out of touch with what's a good translation and what's not for that part of the text, right? Like maybe one of the Jewish Publication Society translations, they might, because sometimes the Christians get a little bit overexcited and they try to make some verses messianic when really they're not, there's some stuff like that. Interesting. I don't know, Liz. Liz says, how come I don't see others' comments? You mean in the chats? Yeah, I don't know. That's strange. So I see chats from Elizabeth Chua, Zeddy, Jen Y, Tet, and XRP for Lovers. That's Yosef. Oh, Yosef in Israel? Is that the Yosef? Oh, great. Usually we'd have just so you know, this is the first tonight. Usually we would have a premiere where I'm actually showing one of my teachings and pausing and talking about it, and just had some problems with my computer, so I decided to do something else instead tonight. Also, we're wanting to launch a podcast sometime soon, and this is kind of an experiment into foray into that area. Yeah. Okay, well, I got a Hebrew class to teach tonight, so otherwise I'd love to stay on with you guys, but that's in 3 minutes, so I think I'm going to have to cut it short. I hope this was helpul for you. If you have any other questions, please write them in the comments or over here in the chat. Or, of course, you can come, as always, to t.me/Messianic Chat. That's the letter T for telegram.me, like me, / all one word, Messianic Chat. We've got, right now, 77 people over there. We talk about various things. It's not just me. There's other teachers over there. And, anything you want to chat about. Sometimes we talk about vaccines. Sometimes it's about, the Hebrew or what. And we're doing a yearly reading there. We go through the Bible in a year altogether. And this year, some of us are also doing the Dead Sea Scrolls, sectarian manuscripts, and some other things. Ah, you can chat. All right. Yeah, you can chat. I think you can't comment on the video until it is actually done with the live stuff, right? So, okay. Oh, okay. I just got informed of one of our pets has passed, it seems.